A Gap in the Spectrum is Marilyn Duckworth's first novel, written in 1959 when she was 23 years old. It is a novel whose strange and quiet compulsiveness entitles it to a very long reading life. It was published by New Authors Limited, an imprint of Hutchinson's in London. It was republished in 1986 by Oxford University Press. The silent, brilliant whirlpool of imagination that this novel discovers makes it an outstanding addition to the New Authors list. A Gap in the Spectrum by Marilyn Duckworth, read by Sarah D. Chapter 7. It was only the following Tuesday morning, when I was punching up the cushions in the lounge and raking out the grate, that the letter from Maureen came. It was an invitation to her 24th birthday party on the following Saturday. I stuffed the letter in my apron pocket and went on raking out the fire. Nevertheless, I was excited, and a sense of expectation warmed the rest of the day for me. I supposed that parties here were celebrated in the same way that I was used to, but the different climate made me doubtful about what I should wear. I dare not ask Mrs. Muir and show what, to her, would seem unnecessary ignorance. Then I thought of the one taffeta frock that was hanging in my wardrobe and decided I would take a chance and wear it. It was plain but inoffensive and didn't look too cold. There would be the question of a present, too. It would have to be something inexpensive, because I'd spent a good part of my wages already on books. The day before, Mr. Muir had driven his wife and Wendelin up to London for the day, and I had spent the afternoon wheeling baby John around the shops, doing a few messages. I had taken this opportunity to buy 2 fairly elementary school books on history and geography. At the same time, I had bought a thick diary with a collection of general information in the front pages. During the school days, I could remember, I had never been very keen on studying for the various exams. Now, however, I found it satisfying in an unfamiliar way and would absorb each fact with the delicate enjoyment of a gourmet sampling new dishes. Coming back to the present, I gathered the 2 empty sherry glasses into my hand, balanced them on an ashtray, and made my way to the kitchen. "Something nice?" Mrs. Muir asked later as I read the letter for a second time, with pink hands straight from the washing up. "Yes," I told her. "Oh, that is nice for you. I don't suppose you've been to many parties since you got here, have you?" I smiled at her obvious curiosity. "Not one, I'm afraid." "It will be a change then, won't it? Wazzie's party will be coming very soon. Are you good at children's parties? They can be such horrible affairs if you don't plan every little thing. We'll have to clear the playroom. There'll only be a handful of other kiddies. She gets excited so easily. And your thing's on Saturday, you say?" On Saturday, I ironed my frock in the kitchen and dressed carefully, shivering a little with cold and excitement. In the bus, I took out Maureen's present and looked at it thoughtfully. It was a writing set from a chain store in cheap imitation leather, and now I noticed that the fern pattern on the front was slightly askew. I had been quite surprised at the low price of it, and of the other goods on sale at this store. All the same, I had not realized at the time that Maureen would guess where her present had been purchased. I had never come across the phenomenon of the cheap chain store in Mickhold. Prices had varied little from shop to shop. In spite of my ignorance, however, a faint inkling of doubt about my choice of the present worried me. Thinking of this, I looked up to see the grey police station at the foot of the Bartlett Street and scrambled off the bus just before it started up again. By the time I reached the doorway of number 21, my face and hands were stiff and raw from the cold wind. Maureen opened the door to me and herded me into the front room with a bright introduction. Kathleen was propped against the mantelpiece in a bright green dress and jumped up to greet me. "This is Jim," she told me on a lower note, and indicated a round-jawed youth with a slight cast in one eye. I told her how nice she was looking. "Gosh, you should have seen me this morning," she said, "rushing around burning scones and things. And Maureen was madly hunting out games from a feeble book she picked up somewhere. I hate games at a party, don't you? Except for murders. We'll be playing murders later on. And Stephen slunk off to the football, as usual. Not the football, the slinking off, I mean. I don't know what made him go to football this week. Just a chance to get away from all our panic, I suppose. Anyway, how about the job? Do you like it? Yes, I do, really. They're very nice people. The little girl's a bit of a handful, I told her. How old? 4.5. She's always encouraging her baby brother to be naughty, and he's catching on quite well. I suppose she'll moan about keeping him to the straight and narrow when he's grown up a bit. That reminds me, where's Stephen? At the bar, Jim interposed, pointing to a wooden bureau well stocked with bottles and glasses. Of course, he's barman. Oh, Jim, we are awful. Here's Diana with nothing to drink. What would you like? The punch is nice and potent. I made it myself. She slipped across the room to fetch me a glass. Stephen glanced up and waved. Later on, in a lull between games, he came over and sat beside me. Hello, enjoying yourself? Very much. Not in a daze tonight, I hope, he grinned. You were in a funny mood that night. Was I? Yes. Well, you may always be like that. I wouldn't know. But you look different tonight somehow. Yes, I feel different. I think London had a bad effect on me. I smiled. You like your job, then? Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. I didn't think girls liked domestic chores, unless it was their own household they were running. No, well, I don't know why, but I like it. The 2 kids are quite amusing. It's more than I can say for my job. He looked rueful. Of course, the kids are amusing sometimes, but more often they're just plain little blighters. How's your glass? Very nice, thank you. I never drink fast. What's this stuff in it? I queried. Mint. Don't worry, it's not an insect, he grinned. Oh, I know. I looked down in embarrassment and took a quick gulp. Well, I'd better get circulating. He stood up and began to move away. Is everybody ready? I'm going to deal the cards for murders, Maureen shouted, and the noise of conversation rattled away to silence. For a moment, a touch of fear chilled me at the grim associations of the word. In the homely atmosphere of the Muir household, I had almost forgotten the frequent crimes reported in the newspapers. At least, I had decided that they confined themselves mainly to the newspapers and had nothing to do with myself and friends. Unconsciously, I had arrived quickly at a fallacy held by many people who had been in this world a lot longer than I had. Looking at the glowing, amused faces around me, I felt the chill of fear die quickly. Ace is murderer, king is judge, Maureen was saying as she dealt the cards around briskly. She went on to explain how the game was played, although most of the guests seemed already familiar with it. I turned over my card and was confronted with the Jack of Spades. At least I wouldn't have to do any murdering myself. Relieved, I followed the others off to hide in the darkened rooms of the house. There was a silence, broken only by an occasional giggle as someone bumped into someone else. A moment of fearful expectancy, then suddenly a pair of warm hands clasped my neck lightly and fell away again. I screamed, a genuine scream of terror, and in that moment I half turned and saw it was Stephen. He was laughing at me, and his teeth were a white line in the moonlight. Then he had disappeared and the lights went on. I flung myself, rather late, into a murdered attitude on the floor. I was discovered with appropriate cries of horror, and the trial was begun. It didn't take long for the judge to pick out Stephen as the murderer, and I suddenly realized that the game always followed the same inevitable pattern. Where was the enjoyment supposed to lie? In the horror of waiting for hands to descend in the darkness? In the opportunity to frighten someone into a scream and not have it treated seriously? I came to life and glanced across at Stephen as I stretched a cramped leg. He was laughing silently again, and his teeth were still white. I wondered how it was I had never noticed them before. I think I was staring rather foolishly, but I forced myself into a smile, and he came over to me. Did I frighten you? You certainly did. I was relieved to be able to talk about it. You didn't come across murders in New Zealand? He asked. I can't say I remember it. Well, keep on the move next time, and you won't be such a likely victim. It is a mad game, but it's been a sort of tradition at our parties. We accepted cards for a second round. It was soon after this that I discovered a tiny rash on my arms and throat. "Look, I've gone all spotty all of a sudden," I confided to Kathleen. She stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. "Stephen, look what you've done to this poor girl. She's come out in a nervous rash all over." "Do you think that's what it is?" I asked doubtfully. "Good heavens!" Stephen lifted up an arm and examined it. He looked at me quizzically, and suddenly I noticed how attractive his eyes were. "It could be measles," Jim said in a flat, solid voice. "Goodness," I began. "No, but I haven't felt sick or anything. I feel quite marvellous." "It's a nervous rash," Kathleen insisted, and it appeared she was right, for it had gone completely by the time the party was breaking up. It was after 1 o'clock, and Stephen offered to drive me home in his little Austin. "Not very elegant, I'm afraid," he said, pulling a tuft of loose stuffing out of the passenger seat. "However, she goes like a bomb, and that's the main thing." I crawled in out of the cold night air, and he shut the door with a clatter. "Have you been to see the old school, St. John's, yet?" he asked, warming up the engine. "No, I'm afraid I haven't." "Oh, good. We can— Oh, blast!" The engine had stopped. "Look, why don't we have a look at it tonight? I just start living at this hour." We bumped off down the road. "But how—" I was going to ask how far it was, but stopped myself in time. That was something I should evidently know already. Stephen laughed at my stuttering. "Well, look, if you're tired—" "Oh, I'm not tired," I said hurriedly. "Do you really want to?" "Of course. Come on. I'll show you how she performs on the sewerage dump hill." He stopped the car at the foot of a concrete slope and handed me out. "Of course, it'll be locked, but you're not interested in the inside, are you? I can tell you it hasn't changed much. I taught here for about 6 weeks, relieving." "Oh, I remember this," I exclaimed involuntarily as we came into the playground. "Of course you do." "No, but I mean, it's just the same," I added quickly. "Hey, you're not cold, are you?" he asked as I drew my coat in closer. "Well, I'm not roasting," I admitted. "Come out of the wind a minute." He led me into a shelter shed and sat me on a form. "It's not too warm either. Gosh, it's a long time since I sat here and ate my lunch. I was down in the boys' school, wasn't I, by the time you came here?" "That's right." "You know, I don't remember you all that well, just someone small and fluffy with big eyes." "I suppose I've changed a lot," I laughed. "Oh, yes. Remember that little red leather coat you had? I do remember that." "I've got a vague recollection." "Oh, but yes, of course you've changed. You used to be pretty. Now you're extremely attractive." I didn't know what to say. "You don't think your fiancé would object to my paying you compliments?" I couldn't help giving a short laugh. "Why? What's funny?" "Nothing. Yes, he's terribly possessive." I noticed that I said this rather contemptuously. "I suppose he writes screeds of letters?" Stephen pursued. "I'm afraid he does. It makes me guilty because I can't write screeds back. I try, but nothing much happens to tell him about." "Oh, surely. Is life so dull? Why not make something happen? You sound a bit disillusioned. What are you, 18? 19, just." "I suppose you believe in young marriages?" "Definitely." "Of course, you're a woman. Well, a girl. Are you madly in love? No, don't bother. I'm always rude like this. I can't help wondering, though, how you could bring yourself to leave him for— A year, isn't it, you mean to stay?" "About that, yes. Well, I wanted to have a last fling." "Yes, I could have believed that till I met you. You seem to have grown into a very subdued, responsible girl. I see no signs of a last fling." "Neither do I," I said rather quietly. I was realizing that this was what I should have been doing while I was in London, what, in fact, I was expected to be doing. "Did your fiancé like the idea of a last fling?" Stephen grinned down at me. "Well, naturally, I promised it would be harmless." I suppose he's having a last fling of his own at the same time? Oh, I doubt it. He doesn't sound, he isn't really the type. Terribly faithful and all that. Oof, I'm freezing. Let's get moving again, shall we? Oh, yes, all right. I suppose we'd better see the common another day. It's a bit wintry. We were silent, going down the slope. Outside Top Lodge, he put his hand on my shoulder. Look, I'll help you with that last fling. Harmless, naturally. His white teeth flashed. Let's make it pictures next Friday. Can you get away from the offspring? Yes, I think so. Thank you. It would be lovely. Good. I'll pick you up. Chapter 8. It was amazing how much pleasure I got out of that one picture of his white teeth smiling a kind of delicious threat. It would come to me several times a day, banging the mats on the line, dusting the brass ornaments which hung from the wall, and my bones seemed to shrink inside me. He took me to the local cinema that Friday to see Black Widow. The whole film stands out in my mind with extraordinary clearness, and this is surprising, because my eyes kept flickering to the curly head leaning back beside me. He had taken my hand in the picture queue with a sudden self-conscious movement, and we had avoided each other's eyes. Now, however, he was smoking, slowly and deeply, with his long brown fingers curled round a stubby holder. I noticed his nostrils pinch and dilate as he drew each breath, and it had a curiously hypnotizing effect on me. We talked for a long time afterwards, sitting in the draughty car. I remember I was fiddling with the chain which drew the door handle down and finally broke it. Stephen laughed and said it was never any use anyway. I don't think your nerves can be very good, he went on. By the way, you don't smoke, do you? No. I watched the thin smoke curl away from his white teeth. I wondered if he cleaned them with baking soda. It makes me sick, I explained. Good girl. It's damned expensive anyway. I discovered there was plenty I could talk about without showing excessive ignorance, as long as the conversation remained general. As soon as Stephen began to illustrate his remarks with quotations and proper names, I tried to steer the conversation on to something else. I even found myself enjoying this. At the same time, I realized it couldn't go on indefinitely, and was prepared to do something about it. Already I had bought 2 books on artists and composers, and a survey of English literature. I hadn't had much opportunity yet to study them, but what I had read I didn't find difficult to remember. It was as if I were merely revising knowledge I had learnt previously. It was so very easy to absorb. So, although I had so much to catch up on, I didn't think of this as an overwhelming task. On the contrary, it was all part of an adventure. I was getting drowsy when Stephen lay his arm across my shoulder, and I glanced up so quickly that he looked startled and said briskly, Have you been up to London at all since you got this job? No, I haven't, I told him. I was just thinking I should have gone up last night to a lecture at the Grail. I'd been going to them. He looked at me blankly, so I went on, Robert's a Catholic, you see. Oh, is that it? He looked faintly embarrassed. I suppose he's been trying to convert you. I suppose you'd call it that. He paused, then, Maureen's got a thing about Catholics. You mean she doesn't like them? I mean she doesn't like them. What do you think? I asked, pleased that I had found someone to discuss it with. Of course, everybody's entitled to their own religion. Personally, I haven't got one. It's much easier. I've never studied the Roman Catholic religion particularly, but I wouldn't like to be involved in it. You don't think I should change to be a Catholic? Mixed marriages are a mess more often than not. Still, I don't think you should turn purely on those grounds. You've just got yourself in a difficult position. I have, haven't I? I was only now realizing its difficulties. Why not forget about him, he said jokingly. Must be plenty of nice atheists around. I was wishing fervently that I could. The next afternoon I met with a series of shocks. I had been dusting the lounge when the telephone rang beside my hand, and I lifted it, expecting another business friend of Mr. Muir's. However, the voice at the other end asked to speak to me. "Oh, hello, Diana," she went on. "It's Maureen here. Hold the line, your boyfriend wants to speak to you." A picture of Stephen flashed into my mind, but a deep masculine voice was already greeting me. "Hello, Di, dear, it's Daddy." "Oh, Daddy," I gasped, and a cold shudder ran right over my scalp. "Yes, I thought I'd surprise you. We got passages at short notice. I supposed you'd be busy working, so I thought I'd better ring and see when it would be best to come around. The Bartletts have kindly asked me to tea." "Where's Mummy?" I asked timidly. "Oh, she can't come ashore till morning. She's on the Queen Mary. I flew, you see. I've just driven up from London in a new Ford Prefect I bought this morning." "Bought?" I was too bewildered to worry about the impression I was making. He gave a deep, happy laugh. "Yes, that's right. Goodness, Di, it's a whale of a job finding your way out of London. I got onto the wrong road twice." "And where are you staying?" I had thought of the 2 bedrooms in the Bartlett's house. "At the Feathers at Merstham. You know, where we were before. Auntie Edna booked for us. Apparently she didn't know about your job." "No, I'm afraid I haven't written. Did she say anything?" "She seemed to think she was the one who should write to you." "Oh, that's all right then." "Well, can I manage to see you tonight?" "Oh dear, I'm dying to see you, Daddy, but I just thought Mrs. Muir's having a bit of a party tonight, and she expected me to help with it. I'll ask her, shall I?" "Oh, no, no, no. I'll see you tomorrow. And Mummy can come over with me. Will tomorrow be all right?" "Yes, of course. But I could probably see you for a short time tonight." "No, don't worry about it. Mustn't get you in bad with your employers. Are they nice people?" "Yes, very. Gosh, I was bowled over hearing your voice like that. I'm just beginning to realize you're in England now." I tried to sound a bit breathless with pleasure. When I rang off, I sat down with the duster hanging from a trembling hand. I was relieved to think that I had 24 hours in which to compose myself. At the same time, I was hoping I hadn't offended my father. He sounded a nice man, though very different from my father and Mick. I wondered if I were normally an affectionate daughter to him. He hadn't sounded offended, and of course my excuse was quite valid. I roused myself as Mrs. Muir came into the room and told her shyly of my phone call. "He's coming round to see me with my mother tomorrow night. You didn't want me for anything, did you?" "No, dear, that's quite all right. I suppose you're all excited. How long is it since you last saw them?" "It's nearly a year now. They went to America before I left New Zealand. At least, they came here first, then went on to America." I had gleaned this fact from something Maureen had said, and I hoped urgently that I hadn't made a mistake. It would be unfortunate if I got my facts wrong at this point. "And now they're back here again. I see," Mrs. Muir nodded. "They certainly get about, don't they?" I was waiting at the top of the stairs when the doorbell rang the following evening. Mrs. Muir came out of the lounge to go to the door, so I halted my footsteps until she had opened it. Then I ran quickly down the stairs and greeted my mother. "Hello, Dicey, darling. Aren't you going to be kissed?" She pulled my cheek round towards her, then gave an embarrassed laugh in Mrs. Muir's direction. "I suppose she's shy after not seeing me so long." "Will you have a drink with us?" Mrs. Muir smiled doubtfully. "Well, that's very kind of you, but her daddy's waiting out in the car. We thought we'd take her back to the hotel so she could see the things we've brought her back from America. I'm sure she's dying to see them. You know what young girls are like about clothes." She tucked her fur collar under her chin as she turned back towards the door, and I followed her eager little steps across the drive. She was small and young-looking, with smooth brown hair pulled back loosely in a bun. My mother and Mick had been bigger built, and her voice had been lower-pitched, but her manner had been much the same, so I didn't feel as strange as I had feared I might. We reached the car, and the first glimpse I had of my father was of the moonlight on his black-rimmed glasses. Then he leant across to open the door, and I saw a dark, square face with a slightly protruding jaw. "Well, what do you think of her?" he asked. "Oh, the car, you mean. Very nice," I responded. "Better than the old Standard, eh?" "You're telling me." We turned out onto the night road. "You're looking a bit peaky. I hope you've been looking after yourself." My mother looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, Mummy!" The word seemed to fit and fasten onto her quite easily. "Well, I know what you're like, always forgetting when you ate last and keeping such irregular hours." "Oh, I keep very regular hours now, out of necessity," I told her. "Oh, do they work you very hard, dear?" She sounded concerned. "Not really. I just don't like getting up in the mornings, that's all." "Well, you haven't changed much in that direction." "The kids are rather sweet," and I went on talking about my job with surprising ease and volubility. "You'll be able to write a book about it, in the Monica Dickens style," my father suggested. I gave an incredulous laugh. "Why, don't you do any writing these days?" my mother asked in surprise. "Not much, I'm afraid." I was learning things about myself. "Too busy writing letters, I suppose," my father said teasingly. "Yes, there's that, of course," I admitted. "You can spend an awful lot of time on writing letters." "I do hope you like these things we've got for you," my mother said as we neared the hotel. "It's hard to tell what someone else will like." "Oh, I'm sure I like them," I assured her. "Goodness, hasn't she got polite, Gerald?" My father laughed. "Oh, it'll wear off, dear. Don't let it worry you." We had reached the Feathers. My parents' room was large and cold, with a small gas fire burning low on one side of the room. I stood on the linoleum in my stockings and slip, trying on various articles of clothing. My mother searched these out from a big shiny brass trunk and kept repeating, "I don't remember what's in here, you know. It's so long since we packed it." "Oh, super," I said. "Smashing," as I whirled around in a wide taffeta skirt. "You like it?" "Oh, yes." I tried to sound eager and pleasantly surprised. It wasn't very difficult. "I should have had this for Maureen's party," I added, picking up a low-necked evening sweater. "Oh, yes. Was it a good party, Di?" "Lovely. We played murders. Oh, you must have spent pounds on all these." "Dollars, dear. Well, it's a pity that green one's too big, but we can take it in when we get home. You won't be wanting to wear it till then, will you?" "No, I don't expect—" I sounded a little disappointed. "Well, they're really for your trousseau, you know. But it's up to you if you want to wear them now. I suppose you're a bit low on clothes at the moment?" She uncurled her bun at the mirror, captured a loose strand, and curled it up again with a quick movement of her fingers. "I must say I'm sick of this skirt and jumper. It's getting like a uniform." I fastened the belt viciously. "But haven't you got another skirt?" "Yes, and another jumper. I alternate them, but it's still pretty dull." "Well, look, take these 2 winter frocks back with you. We'll probably get you some more later on." She glanced across at my father as she said this, but he went on reading a magazine with a little frown splitting his wide forehead. "Oh, thank you, Mummy, but don't bother getting any more. I should be able to save up." "You have changed, I must say." Yes, I must have been spoiled after all. We went down to the lounge later on, a small, oddly shaped room, dimly lit and quite empty. We stood around the fireplace where a surprisingly large fire burned noisily, and ate ham sandwiches brought by an ugly little maid. "So you've given up the idea of a trip to Europe?" my father said quite suddenly. Had I? Taken by surprise, I stared at him and tried to look as if I was taking time to finish my bite before replying. He was smiling in an amused fashion. "London isn't the best place to save up money, is it?" At once I realized what he meant. "No, you're certainly right. I'll never save enough," I agreed with him. "Oh, Gerald, don't tease her," my mother broke in. She turned to me. "We've decided to take you with us when we go on the continent. Would you like that?" "Oh, Mummy, that's wonderful!" I was taken aback and must have looked it. She gave a pleased laugh. "Our finances are working out a little better than we expected. Of course, we'll have to go easy, find cheap hotels and so on." "What about my job?" "Well, if you could get time off. But we'll be away 6 weeks. They'll probably have to get another girl." "Oh dear, I feel a bit awful. But I suppose they'll soon get someone else." "And you shouldn't have any trouble getting another job when you get back," my father added. "It wouldn't matter if it wasn't too wonderful, because you'd be coming home soon after that." "Yes," I agreed thoughtfully, trying to sort out a gathering knot of confusion. It was late when my father drove me home again, and I let myself into the silent house. I was feeling a little dizzy with tiredness and excitement. I was astonished at the ease with which I had fitted into the role of my new parents' daughter. Of course, they hadn't seen me for nearly a year, and any changes that had appeared in my character could well have developed in that time. Nevertheless, I couldn't help feeling a big hurdle had been jumped. Much too excited to sleep, I spent half the night studying maps of Europe and some travel pamphlets which my mother had given me. Gradually, the darkness seemed to be creeping into my eyes, and after a time I gave up trying to keep my heavy lids parted and pulled the cord of my bedside lamp. It wasn't till morning that I thought again of Stephen.